Hi there, it's Meonicorn. Today is the first video where I review all the books on the long list of Women's Prize in 2016. No, in 2018. Why I go back for 2 years. I have finished 3 of the 16 books so far, and by the time I finished the third one, I realized that they were all historical fictions. I didn't plan my reading intentionally, but this is another evidence that how much I love historical fiction. So without further ado, let's dive into the book reviews. The first book I have finished is See What I Have Done by Sarah Schmidt. This book was a historical fiction set in 1892 in America. A girl called Lizzie one morning found her father has been cut and dead in their living room, and she called for help, and weirdly there's no person in the house that heard anything about the murder. I'm afraid my review of the long list will start in a negative way, but clearly this book was a true crime story happened in 1892 in America, but I didn't know that. I walked into this book as a crime and mystery novel, so one day I just got spoiled by watching one of the TBR videos for this book. That wasn't fun, but what's worse is that I thought the author also think everybody knows the story by default. So when she wrote the story, she added a lot of unnecessary things. In other words, the author did a lot of extra work to add the complexity of the novel, which meant to confuse the readers. But unfortunately, it went to the opposite direction. For example, there were 4 narrators in the story, and they all speak in the first-person perspective. And one of the half of the perspectives are all unnecessary. If you delete those perspectives from the story, the whole story will just go into the same direction, and the plot and character development will have no effect at all, and also the structure of the novel will be more clear. When I was reading those point of views, I can hear the author talks to me. This is where you can understand their motivations. And there are so many more times when the author have to write down her thoughts in order to help you to understand the story. For instance, once the father who died at the beginning of the story asked about his first wife's siblings, he said, "How long does that man stay in?" So after the other person responds, the author wrote, "That man, not a way to describe your beloved dead wife's siblings." I have 2 thoughts here. The first one is, why don't you think we can get to a point without your statement? The second thought is, if you think we cannot get to the point, why don't you write it better? And speaking of bad writing, I thought for a very long period of time, the women in the book were teenagers. But after I read some chapters, I found a sentence like, "in my whole 43 years of life." So I was shocked because they sound no way like in their 30s or 40s. They sound straightforward teenagers who happen to also be flat and plain. So in this case, the author did need to write down that they are all adults, otherwise readers like me will never know. And the other thing that frustrated me a lot is that each of the chapters, they started with a specific time point. For example, the first chapter started at August 1st, 1892, and they sometimes jump to the previous point of time, and that was all fine. I'm all for jumping time periods. But in this book, a chapter called August 1st, 1982 can easily talk about a event that happens decades ago after a few paragraphs. I get that people dive into their memories in that day and they suddenly recall some events happened like a long time ago, but I was fed up when I found at the second half of the book there's a chapter called August 1st, 1982 starts from describing an event happened like 10 years ago and spent 4 whole pages on that. So overall, you get the idea. I didn't like this book. I had like 360 degrees of problems with this book. And initially I gave this book 2 stars because it's not hateful, but after I reading some other books on the long list, I decided to lower my star rating to 1.5 stars for this book. The second book I read was a beloved book on BookTube, that is The Mermaid and Mrs Hancock by Image Hermes Gura. This novel started with a businessman called Mr. Hancock. One day, the captain of his boat sold his boat and got him a mermaid instead. As a humble and traditional businessman, Mr. Hancock did not know what to do with the mermaid, so he decided to follow the advice of the captain and show the mermaid in town. And in the meantime, there's a group of prostitutes got excited about the mermaid, and one of them was our female protagonist, Angelica. When I opened the book, I immediately get why so many people loved this book, because the writing was just purely beautiful, especially just came from the book that See What I Have Done. To this book, it's like You finally got an ice cream after you have walked in the hottest summer day in Texas for 2 hours. There are a lot of descriptive words and sentences, but they are all for the purpose of plot or character development. None of them are for showing off vocabularies. But however, I did get bored in a huge chunk in the middle of the book, because I like reading things related to Mr. Hancock. He's a man who lives in social norm and his life was related on his reputations. So when she interacted with the prostitutes, he got all awkwardness and it was just lovely to read. But in the middle of the book, he didn't show up that often, and a lot of characters are like the person in the TV show Gossip Girl, which I do not appreciate. And something very predictable happened, which I'm not hoping for. For a long time in the middle of the book, I was like, oh, I see what's coming, oh, please no. And all the please no came true. And also at the beginning of the book, there's a side character did something I think was a great foreshadowing of her future adventures. But in the middle of the book, she just disappeared if not forgotten by the author, so all my expectations fall into pieces. So when I was really bored about this book and I was doubted if I can enjoy this book as much as other people, there's a great turn happened in the third of the book in a wonderful way. All the things became three-dimensional again, Mr. Hancock's awkwardness returned, and also nothing very predictable happened. At least I didn't predict that much. And also dramatic events happened quite often in a good way. My favorite scene in the third part of the book was once Angelica became defensive and also pride. I just want to applaud for her. I didn't want to get a lot of things away. If you have read the book, maybe you can recognize the scene. But besides my enjoyment of this book, I do want to mention that this book also described some side black characters. I enjoy their argument and debate with their identity with themselves, because this book was set in the 1785 and 1786. And this year I have read some books about black history in the UK, and I appreciate this book didn't hide this period of history from the time. But once in this book, the black characters were described by an inappropriate noun in the book. Naturally, I would just think they are for character development, which is true in this case. However, the other day, I have just read an essay from Roxane Gay where she talks about how a great historical TV show or books can approach to its purpose without using the historical accurate but inappropriate words to black people. Because one should know the origins of this word, and also they still hurt people today. And these are all my words to Roxane Gay's opinion. I believe that she addressed to this point in a more organized way. I don't think this is necessary account for this book, and I myself haven't set my side of Roxane Gay's opinions. However, I just think I would mention it since I noticed it. To come to the overall rating of the book, I gave the third part of the book a full 5 out of 5 stars. I think that part deserved all the hype this book got. However, I don't think the great third part of the book can cover up for the first 2/3. Especially when I'm super bored in the middle of the book. So I give this book 3.75 stars, but I do think the writing of this novel was fabulous throughout the whole book, and I enjoyed it a lot. The third book I read was A Boy in the Winter by Rachel Seifert, which I think will be my shortest review on my channel because it's a good book, and I don't have a lot to say. This book is also, of course, a historical fiction set in a Ukrainian town during World War II period, and when the Nazis came to the village and took over the village. There are tons of characters in the book, and you got their stories piece by piece. There are people trying to save other people, there are people trying to save themselves, there are people like warned other people, and there are people being warned in some way. The format of this book actually reminds me of a very specific piece of art in China called Along the River in Qingming Festival. When you have like long row of painting with thousands of characters under the same background, the characters are doing their own things and influenced by the background as individuals but also as a group. I wish I was more emotionally involved by this book, but unfortunately I didn't. But that doesn't equal to a bad book. I think this book is a solid like 3-star good book. 3 stars is not a bad star, it's just not a very exciting book for me. And this concludes my first video in my Women's Press Longlist review series, I guess. I had so much fun reading these books and reviewing them, and I hope you find this review helpful. And also, if you have read any of the books, please let me know your thoughts. And more importantly, happy reading. See you next time. Bye!